All right, guys, the Boston Celtics just won the NBA championship. And as a Jazz fan, we got to ask ourselves, can we actually do it? Let's talk about it. It's the Hoops Nerd Show. Okay, before we get into this, guys, make sure if you're a Jazz fan that you like and subscribe to the channel. This is the best Utah Jazz podcast, YouTube channel, content, whatever. Make sure you like and subscribe and help grow this channel. All right, guys. So the Boston Celtics win the national the NBA title, whatever you want to call it. And for Jazz fans, this is tough because the Jazz aren't even close to there right now. And it just makes you ask yourself, if you're a Jazz fan, can the Jazz actually do this? Is this something the Jazz can actually do? And I'm here to tell you that yes, they can, but it's going to take more than just the easy road that the Jazz have historically always done. You know, the easy road has led them to get some good players in the past, but if they do not do what they are supposed to do and should do, and what all the other championship teams do, including the Los Angeles Lakers, who we all think they just feed players to them. No, there's a certain way you got to do this. Let's look at the Boston Celtics. So the interesting thing about the Boston Celtics and the connection to the Jazz is obviously Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge was with the Boston Celtics and has now been kind of the builder of two cores that have won titles, with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen, and then this one with him drafting Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And people can argue, well, he tried to trade Jason Tatum. Well, yeah, but they ended up not making that happen. We don't know all the ins and outs of everything. And guess what? To make a championship, you got to get a little bit lucky in a lot of different ways, but you can't argue that he did not put together the cores of both those teams that won those titles. Brad Stevens deserves a lot of credit for what he's done after Danny Ainge with bringing in Kristaps Porzingis. Derek White was an incredible trade, and if anything, you've got to look at the San Antonio Spurs. Like, should you have gotten more? And then obviously the Drew Holiday trade, which was just bad management by the Milwaukee Bucks. And honestly, we should probably talk about that a little bit and what we should do as a team and how you build a team. And honestly, not necessarily how you build the team, but how you should not build a team. And that can be taught by the Milwaukee Bucks this year. In fact, let's start there. The Milwaukee Bucks, who had won a title with Drew Holiday, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Chris Middleton, that core won a title. And they decided, because of the coaching from last season, which, you know, I agree was not the best out there. Utah is familiar with the Coach Bud type coaching that they got in Milwaukee, where it's just set in stone. This is what we do. We don't ever change. And it cost them games. And what did they do? They trade Drew Holiday to the Portland Trailblazers to get Damian Lillard, who can't play defense at all. And he's also older. And it didn't work out. It worked out about as well as much as you'd expect, because guess what happened? Damian Lillard with the Bucks did the exact same thing Damian Lillard did with the Trailblazers. Yes, he had some incredible shot-making moments, but he also had injuries that he had in Portland. And that came over to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee also couldn't defend on the perimeter with him. It was really bad. And so it's one thing we can learn from Milwaukee is you should not be trading away elite defensive players that are also great playmakers and leaders for bad defensive players, regardless of who they are. Damian Lillard is a putrid defensive player, and there were a lot of Jazz fans that wanted to trade for Damian Lillard, and it turned out that was not the case. That was not a good idea. Now, it's interesting, you know, you could argue why it made sense, because they needed an end of game scorer, but they didn't even get to that point to have him. And obviously they lose Giannis in the playoffs with injury, and that's the end of that. But that's not the way you win titles. You win the title by getting a core, and you draft that core and win them. And that's what we've seen from both the Boston Celtics with their former era with Paul Pierce, and with this era with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. What happens with Paul Pierce? They draft Paul Pierce. He becomes the number one option. They play with Paul Pierce. They have multiple seasons where they're trying to grow with him. And by the way, Paul Pierce is not an off-ball shooter like a Lowry Markkanen. Paul Pierce is a guy you can give the ball to, and he can score and dominate a playoff game. And they went through their lumps. They had some difficult years, but Paul Pierce slowly developed, and they were able to make a big-time trade for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. You've got to give credit to Danny Ainge for doing that, but they don't win that title if they don't draft Paul Pierce first. Just flat out. This second idiom that they go through, how do they get Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Well, the interesting thing is those both were not Boston Celtics picks. They were Brooklyn Nets picks that they had traded their core. Ironically, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce to Brooklyn. They get these picks from Brooklyn. It was a revolutionary trade. Most people thought it was a ridiculous thing to trade these good players for future picks. Well, those future picks turned into two incredible ones. The one that was Jason Tatum, if you'll remember, and I believe it was pick swap, goes number 1. So they get the number 1 pick. That's what it took to get Jason Tatum. And what does Danny Ainge do? Because he knew that Markelle Fultz wasn't the one he wanted, and he knew Philadelphia wanted him. He knew Lonzo Ball was going number 2 to the Lakers. He trades back to 3 and takes Jason Tatum, who was his guy all along. And they've got their number 1 option star that can handle the ball and score and facilitate in the playoffs. 6'9", 6'10", huge scoring wing that just can dominate games. Now, Jason Tatum is probably not a top 5 player, but he's a top 10 player, especially when he's playing well. And that's what Utah needs. It's not complicated. Utah needs that ball in the hand wing player, or at least dominant player, that when you put the ball in his hands, he can dominate a game and score and facilitate for your team. A guy that gives problems to the opposing team every single night. And it also needs to be a guy that can play defense. Paul Pierce played defense. Kevin Garnett played defense. Ray Allen played defense. Jason Tatum plays defense. Jaylen Brown, who, by the way, also a Brooklyn Nets pick, who goes number 3 overall, goes to them, and they have their core. Now, I need to write about this, and I should probably just do a video about it. Maybe we'll just talk about it, or maybe we'll just talk about it now. In fact, yeah, let's just talk about it now. This is what you do. This is how you build it. You have to get your stars in the draft. It's the way the Jazz have done it. Your number 1 star of all time, Karl Malone. He was drafted, I can't remember, was it 12th or in that range? And they get him in the draft. He drops probably because of some of the off-court things, and that's why he dropped. But the Jazz got their top 5 player in Karl Malone in the draft. And then how do they get their second best player on that team, John Stockton? In the draft. And then what do you do afterwards? Once you have that core duo that you know is going to dominate games and be a perennial playoff team, that's when you go out and make big-time trades. Just like Boston trades for Derek White and Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis and all these guys. Utah did the same thing when they trade for Jeff Hornacek, right? They didn't quite do it enough with Darren Williams. They get Darren Williams at, ironically, number 3. They trade up to get him for, I can't remember what it was. It was like from 5 or 6 or something like that. They trade up to get Darren Williams, and then they get Carlos Boozer in free agency, which is arguably the greatest free agency signing for the Jazz in their team history. I don't know if that's actually that arguable. And that was the core. And then they get Mehmet Okur, and that team actually made a Western Conference Finals. But you don't get that team. And here is the theme. You don't get that team without that number 3 overall pick and getting Darren Williams, right? Flat out. Let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks. They'd lose tonight, but guess what? They tanked. Go ask Mark Cuban. They lost games on purpose. He was fined $600,000 by Adam Silver for actually admitting it, that they were tanking, and they go into the lottery. They were the number 3 worst team that year. They were a mess, and that included with an old Dirk Nowitzki. They lose their lottery, fall to 5. they get lucky and they're able to trade up to 3 like the Jazz were for Darren Williams, and they get Luka Doncic. And then what do? Once they have that star, they had Jalen Brunson. They made a terrible mistake by not keeping him. He goes to New York. But what do? And what were they able to do? Trade for a secondary star in Kyrie Irving. Utah is upside down right now. Thinking about the Jazz right now, what do the Jazz have? The Jazz have some young, nice prospects in Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks and a little bit of Bryce Sensabaugh, but I'm a little higher on Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks. And they have a secondary star in Lauri Markkanen. Now, maybe Keontae George becomes that ball-in-the-hand superstar. Maybe he becomes, Steph Curry. You never know. Never say never. I don't know if I see that, but I do think Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks have the potential to be those secondary kind of stars. Why can't they be the Derek Whites or the Kyrie Irvings or those types of players that play off of that superstar player? Taylor Hendricks has some real interesting things about him. The defensive ability is very apparent, and he can shoot the three, and he showed a little bit with the ball in his hands. So we'll see. Who knows? Maybe he can become an elite level player, but Utah does not have that number 1 top 5 potential player. They don't have the Anthony Edwards that Minnesota has that nearly got them to the title. They don't have Nikola Jokic, who's a top 5 player. And I know there's people out there that will say you don't have to lose games to get that top pick. It is extremely rare for that to happen. If you do not get a top 5 pick, you are asking for miracles, like even Giannis on the Milwaukee Bucks. They drafted him. He was like 6'8", 6'9". He grew 3 inches after they drafted him. Is that the plan? Is that you draft some guy out of Greece that you have very little tape on, and then when you get him, you just hope that he also grows 3 or 4 inches while he's in your training camp? Is that the plan? No. Or that you get Nikola Jokic in the second round, you just hope that some guy out of Serbia or wherever he's from turns into the best player in the NBA? Very unlikely. What is likely is that when a player of elite caliber talent is there at the top of the draft and you are not a very good basketball team, you can ensure yourself a chance to get that type of guy by being bad. Right? And you need to be really bad. And to be honest, even if the Jazz renegotiate Lauri Markkanen in August, which is when that's possible, are we sure they're not even a bottom 5 team anyway? The issue is, would you rather go into the lottery being the 5th worst team or the 1st worst team? Because guess what? Even if you drop 2 or 3 spots, like the Jazz did this last draft, you're still in that top 3, 4, or 5. Because what happens is after that point, you keep your position. So if the Jazz are terrible next year and they get a shot and they don't even get it, they still ensure themselves a top 5 pick. And in the upcoming draft, that's worth it. Completely worth it. And to be honest, it's a path the Jazz have kind of forced themselves into. They traded for John Collins last year, which is fine. It was free. He's basically going to be free to whoever wants him now. They have Jordan Clarkson, who they re-signed. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me why they re-signed him, but they're going to probably trade him this offseason. They have Colin Sexton. They got in their trade, probably very likely available if someone wants to actually make an offer. And I'm guessing that's 1 or 2 first-round picks, but most likely one good first-round pick will get them Colin Sexton. But the reason you get all these picks, the reason that the Jazz traded Rudy Gobert and they traded Donovan Mitchell was to get these good picks. But the thing is the difference between now what the Jazz have from Cleveland and Minnesota and those picks is Minnesota and Cleveland, those trades actually worked out for them. Rudy Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year in his second season with Minnesota. So the first round pick that the Utah's getting next year, not this draft, but next draft, is likely going to be late 20s or mid 20s or somewhere in that range. Donovan Mitchell, all the reports are that he might re-sign. So if he does, that helps them win a lot of games. I don't think they're going to win a title, but they're going to be a pick in the 20s. So the Jazz can't expect that one of these picks is just going to fall into the top 3. Now, who knows? Maybe something crazy happens, like injuries and all these things, and one of those teams gets snake bit, but you can't bet on those things happening, right? If you bet on miracles, good luck. Good luck. What you can do is put your fate into your own hands and make this happen. So what Utah can do, since they don't own their pick next year unless they're bottom 10, is make sure you're bottom 3. Don't even make it close. Go out and trade Lauri Markkanen for an incredible offer, get the picks you want, and be bad. Because guess what? You want to be the champion of the NBA, you've got to be the best team. And the Boston Celtics were the best team, right? You don't need to worry about how good you make someone else. Like if the Lakers come calling and they want to give you 3 protected firsts and take the protections off their 2027 pick, you got to think about it. Because they're poorly run, and it's very likely post LeBron that they're not going to be very good. But you can't worry about that. What you have to worry about is that we're going to go out and get our MVP caliber player, and there's a potential there with Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey. There's potential there. And then the following season, there's AJ DeBonsa. There is Cam Boozer. There's a ton. And just as a refresher course, Utah does not get their pick next year unless it's bottom 10. And if they get bottom 10, then that means the following year it has to be bottom 8 or it goes to Oklahoma City. So Utah has to now take their destiny into their own hands, make some tough decisions, do the right thing. Do you guys want this title? Do you want that championship trophy to be in the Delta Center in the glass case and you walk by it every time you go to the game? Because I want that. I want that. But it takes time and it takes sacrifice. Nothing that was hard or worth it was ever easy. And the Jazz are playing it on hard mode. This ain't LA. LeBron ain't coming. Ironically, tanking is the reason that LA won their title, right? Here's how. LA had like 3 number 2 overall picks: Lonzo Ball, D'Angelo Russell. I think Julius Randle was a number 7 overall pick. They traded all these different players for the pieces to go around LeBron. They don't get Anthony Davis and win a title, get that second star with LeBron, if they don't tank those years and aren't bad and don't have the players and picks to trade, right? If they don't send Brandon Ingram to the Pelicans, they don't get Anthony Davis. This is how it's done. This is how it works. You have to get your stars in the draft. And if you want to make sure you get a star, you've got to ensure you get to that top of the draft, especially when the superstars are there. And there's one coming. And, I think Lauri Markkanen is a great guy. He's a really great secondary option on a good basketball team. We know he can be that. But do you really want to be the Milwaukee Bucks and make your decisions based off of what makes Lauri Markkanen happy? Because that did not work out for the Bucks, and they were doing that based off of Giannis, who's a literal MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Finals MVP champion. Lauri Markkanen did not make the All-Star team last year. He is a non-All-Star this last season. You're going to make your decisions of your team based off of the wants of a non-All-Star? Is that really what we're doing? Ryan, is that what you're doing? You're going to make a decision on the future and potential championship possibilities for this team on a non-All-Stars whim? That's not what I would do. That's not what the Jazz should do. Because doing that is not how you win a championship. That is not how you build a championship team. And by the way, even when you get those players, it takes time. They have to develop. It took Jason Tatum time. It took him playoff runs to lose, build those battle scars and lose. Jaylen Brown had to get better and better and better. Remember, we talked about how he can't dribble left and all this stuff, gets a big time contract. Well, he certainly proved all of us wrong. Now they've got a title. And if Utah wants to do it, that's how it's done. There's no other way. As you know, in the Avengers, when Doctor Strange goes through all the different possibilities and how to defeat Thanos, and he finds there's one scenario when he tells Iron Man there's one scenario that they can defeat Thanos. And this is it. Utah has to get their stars, and preferably 2 superstars in these drafts and these upcoming 2 drafts. They have to have the secondary stars next to them, which they potentially already have in Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks, but they do not have their top 5 guy yet. They don't. They don't have their Luka Doncic. They don't have their Jason Tatum. They don't have their Anthony Edwards. We don't have it. And you have to have it. We don't have our Karl Malone. We don't have our Darren Williams. And unless you have that, you aren't winning a title. So would you like to be a B+ team or a B- team that gets blown out in the playoffs in the first round? Or do you want to actually win a championship and crush losers and fools on your way to a title? Because that's what I want. All it takes is to get the best player, and the Jazz can do that. You just have to draft them. You don't have to save all these picks just to trade for them. How about you just literally go to the draft and you can draft them, and they will be a part of your team, and you can win a title doing that. That's it. That's the formula. It's not complicated. It takes time. It takes patience. And if Cooper Flagg doesn't turn out to be, then you do it again. And if you're lucky enough to get DeBonsa and he doesn't turn out to be, then you do it again. And you keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you get that player. And then you make the trades. And then you get the secondary guys. And then you make the team building moves to get you over the top. But the Jazz aren't there yet. So these ideas where people say things like, oh, trade for Brandon Ingram. Oh, trade for Zach LaVine. Or trade for these guys that other teams don't want on their team. That's not the way. That is how you become a B- basketball team and never go anywhere. That's how you become the Chicago Bulls. That's how you become the Sacramento Kings that never won anything forever. And by the way, the Sacramento Kings who made all these trades and blah, 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 they didn't make the playoffs last year. Traded Halliburton for Domas Sabonis, and they made the playoffs, and now they can't even make the playoffs. You got to draft your superstars, guys, and you have to make sure they are the guy. Can't be doing B- basketball teams. All right, guys, thanks for listening. I had to talk about it. This is important. We're doing Jazz videos every day. This was today. If you're a Jazz fan, you haven't liked and subscribed to the video, what are you doing? We're here every day now, Monday through Friday. Monday night through Friday night, I record. So I guess for you guys, it's Monday night through Friday night. There we go. That's the schedule. It is what it is. All right, let's give a shout out to the All-Stars. I keep forgetting to do it. Let's give a shout out to Baby Elliott Matson, Ryan Perry, the legend, Nathan Butnett Burkhardt, Christian House Money to Haas, the Outlaw Jesse James Nelson, Ezekiel Raicibe, the man from down under. See ya, Alexa Later, Built Ford Tough, Alexander Tufts, Jorge Arrizaga, Mimigo de Abajo, Jordan the Goat, Best Rule, Tyson Price, The Price is Right, Austin R. Grant, Editor Extraordinaire, KG10 to TH5, Patrick Kaguba, the Connoisseur, and Robert Hall of Fame. Like I said, guys, like and subscribe to the channel. I will talk to you tomorrow.